afraid to sit on the front.
Yep.
You're right. That's not the ADB. No one wants the front.
Go get the brush of people coming in.
Of course, yeah. The stragglers have to sit at the front.
Yeah.
That's actually meant to be true.
Yeah, on a clean surface.
Yeah, welcome to our second Dorset Sitecore user group. If you're not an ex-Redwebber, the toilets are out there. The back doors are going to be locked in a minute, so leaving tonight, we'll go out around the back, and then if you need to get back into Holdenhurst, just round the front. Today we've got myself covering Sitecore Azure, Tristan covering some of the marketing fundamentals of Sitecore, and then we've got Steve McGill with us from Sitecore to talk about AppLayer. So hopefully it'll be an interesting highlight tonight. So just a quick overview. Hopefully everyone knows what Azure is, but it's Microsoft's cloud offering, and it's basically a way we can deploy applications to Microsoft data centers. There's three different ways effectively we can make use of Azure. There's infrastructure as a service, which is effectively making use of virtual machines hosted on their platform. The advantage of this is the underlying hardware we don't have to worry about, but equally you still need to manage and maintain this software on the servers. There's then platform as a service, which abstracts away the underlying server, and that allows us to purely deploy our applications as services. So if you look at, say, SQL Server, rather than worrying about installing and managing SQL Server instances, you just deploy a database straight to SQL Azure. The next level up is then obviously software as a service, where you're then subscribing to a piece of software and you're not worrying about any of that underlying management of that software. And of course, Azure comes with the great portal as well as PowerShell integration as well. So, a brief history on Sitecore and Azure. So, since I think 6.3, there has been a Sitecore Azure module available, and that basically allows you to deploy Sitecore to Azure Cloud Services. However, there were a few problems with that implementation. It still required an on-premise management instance, so you couldn't effectively fully deploy your whole application to Azure. You had to have this on-premise instance where you would configure and manage your Azure server farms, and then you would deploy to those cloud services on Azure. The other downside of cloud services is there's no way to easily manage scaling. It would be a separate process which you'd have to use third-party applications to manage. And there was also lack of support for other Sitecore modules. The main problem, I guess from my perspective, is Sitecore was trying to replicate the Azure portal and management within Sitecore, which, when you've got such a great interface and set of scripting APIs available with it, it kind of conflicted with what Microsoft was trying to do. And cloud services is almost a sort of deprecated platform which Microsoft is trying to now move away from. So since Sitecore 8.2 update 1, there's now an implementation of Sitecore making use of the Azure App Services, in particular using web apps. And this gives us a way to deploy a whole Sitecore instance to the Azure cloud. It removes the need to have this on-premise management server, and web apps give you complete control over scaling. So, for example, you would only need to worry about deploying one content delivery instance, and then you would just scale it out from that single instance. So it gives you real flexibility, and then you can configure rules to auto-scale and so on. There's a completely different way to provision these environments. So it's it's all based around either using the Sitecore marketplace or Azure Resource Manager templates, ARM templates, to effectively use PowerShell to script that whole process. Using these Sitecore provided mechanisms, that allows you to spin up security hardened instances of Sitecore right out of the box. And there's some really cool things. So you can connect Visual Studio straight up to your Azure instance and remotely debug applications. So if you're experiencing like a really difficult issue, it's a great way to try and debug that without having to take database backups and so on. So with the new Sitecore Azure implementation, there's a few changes to some of the core components. So there's a big shift away from the file-based Lucene search, because obviously the app service is stateless. So the implementation by default is now based on Azure Search, which is a sort of search as a service instance that can still be swapped out if you wish to use Solar. But in the nature of using Microsoft services, it kind of makes sense to stick with Azure Search. Session state is now using Redis cache. So again, we're moving away from either in-memory or using SQL Server. The Redis cache is obviously this huge potential then to use that for other forms of caching as well, because that's pretty awesome. I think there's a lot of potential around there. And the other biggie is application insights. So where the web apps are stateless, we can't store log files on those instances. Instead, all logging information is now pushed into application insights, and we also gain all this extra juicy information such as CPU usage, network latency, and so on. So it gives a really powerful way to sort of manage and monitor our applications. And with this, we can do some fairly intelligent stuff. So we can create intelligent alerts. So rather than falling into the trap that I guess most of us developers have done, where you send an email on every exception raised on a site and quickly take down a whole mail server, you can do an email when there's so many exceptions within, say, a 10-minute period, and ping off one email and save your whole mail server going down. As well as that, there's Azure Traffic Manager to manage load balancing between your web app instances, and it allowing you to knock ones out of the load balancer and so on. However, there is one issue, and that's MongoDB. As part of the ARM templates and PowerShell scripting, there is no way at the moment to spin up a Mongo instance as part of that process, or at least Sitecore don't provide that. And I suspect there might be a reason behind that, but there's three different options available to us. We can either go down the route of and managing our own Mongo instance, which is by far the cheapest option, but you require that knowledge of managing Mongo instances, and ideally you would probably host it on a Linux VM, so it needs that Linux knowledge as well. There's then services such as MLab, which allow you to quickly spin up Mongo instances in the cloud. You can spin up instances on AWS and Azure, and then just connects them like any other Mongo database. The downside of this is it's probably double the cost of using a VM, and you don't get as much flexibility or control over that. The third option is using Sitecore's XDB Cloud, where Sitecore manage not just the Mongo instances, but also your reporting analytics databases as well. So it's a case of just enabling that configuration, and then Sitecore take care of all of that. But again, obviously, the costs are now increasing further. There is one potential that is sort of not there yet, but could be in the next few months, and that is Azure Document DB. So at the moment, Microsoft are providing an API layer which mimics MongoDB. So you can create Document DB instances connects them as if they're MongoDB databases. This, at the moment, they've literally, as of yesterday, just made that generally available. So technically, it may work. I was hoping to try it today. I got as far as creating the instances, but couldn't get the ARM templates working. So I suspect maybe it isn't fully compatible. However, the cost of that is probably still going to be greater than running it on a VM. So you've got to balance out the ease of deploying to something like DocumentDB and having Sitecore look after a lot of that, or managing that yourself. I guess if you're moving to Azure, then probably the overhead of the DocumentDB offering may be the right choice in the long term. So these are a couple of slides I've nicked from Sitecore, which just give an insight into different ways you can set up your Azure environments. There's nothing particularly special. You have your application insights, SQL Azure as normal, and your session state database, and optionally you can create your processing and reporting servers. And this would be created with using one of the XP ARM templates. If you want to take it a step further, then you can start considering redundancy. Now this would be using a couple of the different Azure regions. Now, personally, I think this is probably overkill for most clients. I think unless you're having extremely large volumes of traffic and your client is multinational, this probably isn't worth it, because standard Azure resilience within their own data centers is really high. So it's really a balance between costs and the level of redundancy you need. So in terms of provisioning the servers, there's two different ways. There's the Azure Marketplace, which you can basically go to. There's two different offerings from Sitecore. There's the XM, which is just CMS only mode, and then the full experience platform. And this is a simple, I'll show you really quickly in a minute, but it's click, configure a couple of things, and you leave it running. Come back half an hour's time, and you have a full Sitecore platform set up. It's great for demos, or if you quickly want to spin up an instance to play around. Beyond that, I think it's pretty pointless. I think delivering sites for clients and managing projects, we need kind of easily repeatable processes. We may want to customize some of this process, and this is quite a rigid template, but equally very useful.
We're probably going to be building more options into the dialog which pops up, where you can configure exactly how it should be installed, which makes it less pointless.
Yeah, I think it's cool to just test stuff, but yeah, all you can do at the moment is select Mongo instances and so on.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just teasing. But, how long does it take to spin up? I've not actually tested.
25 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's quicker with the PowerShell scripts,
yeah,
even though it's probably doing the same thing. I don't know if that's just because it feels quicker, but the other way is making use of the Azure Resource Manager templates, which is actually a set of a few tools, but it allows us to script the whole process. So Sitecore have now released the Sitecore Azure Toolkit. And what this is a set of PowerShell commandlets and effectively common configuration as part of your ARM templates to allow you to deploy Sitecore to Azure. And an ARM template is effectively a definition for a series of resources. So it might be so many SQL Azure resources, so many web app resources. It's just the scaffolding and basic configuration. It's not the actual files you deploy to the server. With that, you end up with these commands. So you can basically trigger a Sitecore deployment, but you can also point to a local Sitecore instance and create a deployment package from that local instance. So it allows you to create your own custom installation, which you can then and spin up relatively quickly. There's then a separate GitHub repository which is for these quick start templates, and these go hand in hand with the resource toolkit. And I'll go through these in a bit more detail in the demo, but these provide a set of kind of default configuration where we can specify things like MongoDB connection strings, what region we want to use. So these are effectively templates we want to clone down and start adapting depending on how we want to set up our environments. And then the third piece of the puzzle is the Sitecore web deploy packages. And these sit alongside, so if you log into the portal, you'll now see these below the standard executable and zip installers. And these packages basically contain two things. There's a web deploy package, which is your content for a Sitecore installation, and then a series of DAC files for each database, and that's a way of effectively spinning up a database backup effectively. Well, it's not technically a backup on SQL Azure. And then we also have three different options. So the top one, XP0, is a single instance of Sitecore. It's not security hardened. It's purely there for dev test style environments. There's then your full XP configuration, and this will deploy a CD, a CM, reporting, processing, and it will security harden those as well. So there's probably more you would still want to do on top, but it does a lot of that noddy out-the-box stuff, which is missed from doing a zip installation, let's say. And then lastly at the bottom is XM, which is the same as XP, but CMS only mode. And when you're deploying to Azure, these need to be uploaded to blob storage, and then your PowerShell script reference these packages from blob storage to then deploy the actual Sitecore installation within your provisioned environment. So, because we're now on Azure using web apps, everything becomes really flexible. So, let's say we're in Visual Studio. This is 2017, I think, and you can basically now select I want to deploy to an Azure App Service, connect up to whichever Microsoft account you're using, pick the web app you wish to deploy to, and go. And that will deploy your custom code up to your web app, which is just ridiculously easy. Obviously, production, UAT style environments, you're going to have that as part of a continuous integration process. You're not going to want to be going straight to production from Visual Studio. Also, it's probably worth thinking in terms of how you manage deployments. So you don't want to be just deploying your custom code on top of a web app constantly, because there's that risk of having stale items on your instance. So let's say you do a big refactor, delete some things, move some things around. If you're just deploying on top each time, you're going to end up with all these stale files on your web apps. So in reality, the best thing to do is look at creating, if you go back to the previous slide, rather than using these Sitecore web deploy packages, you want to be creating your own client-based web deploy package. And what that is it's not a client solution, it's Sitecore plus any modules, so it might be Web Forms for Marketers or Coveo, all packaged up within this. However, you want to exclude the databases, so every time you deploy, you can deploy a clean Sitecore installation plus any additional components you may need, and then you deploy your custom solution on top of that. So each time you can be sure that environment is fresh, there's no stale items. Obviously databases, we don't want to be starting afresh each time, but there's ways to manage that using Unicorn as well. the other thing in terms of deployments is now we're using Azure Web Apps, we can make use of staging slots. So, and this, as far as I'm aware, doesn't affect Sitecore licensing. So we can deploy into a staging slot, we can then test that. Once we're happy with that, we can then switch the slot. So you pull out your live slide, push in your new deployment slot. Obviously that's then in production. However, if there's a problem, then you can quickly swap that back out. So there's a real flexibility in making sure you can test before things go back into load, but you can then quickly swap that out. And I think we often we test outside of the load and put it in, but we often forget about, well, what happens if it all goes horribly wrong? How do we reverse that back out? So the staging slots are quite a nice way to do that. So I'm just going to give a real quick demo of this stuff. That's it now. So what we've got here is the Azure Marketplace. And from Sitecore, we basically end up with these two offerings at the moment. And it is literally as quickly as picking the one you want, logging into Azure, and then just customizing how you want that deployment to look. So it's literally the subscription, your app name, resource group. You have to configure SQL admin login, and then for XP you just need a Mongo instance already spun up. After that, click create, wait 20 minutes, and you've got a Sitecore instance. Because it takes 20 minutes, in true Blue Peter fashion, here's one I made earlier. So all these resources under Sub-Marketplace are created through using, basically by following that process. And you can see we've got our CD instances, CN, processing, reporting, so on and so on. Just to prove I'm not making this all up, this should work. Yeah, so there we go. Our beautiful Sitecore site. And obviously you can scale this up, and more importantly, scale it out. So if we wanted 3 CD servers, we could scale that out appropriately. So that's all right, but I'm pretty sure everyone wants to do the PowerShell way of working. Shout if you can't see this very well. So the Azure Toolkit is basically a set of commanders provided by Sitecore. There's also a set of resources which kind of form the foundation and bootstrap for creating all the different types of services. So we can see there's specific things for creating Redis, CD instances, and so on. As well as that, we have the quick starts, and these are literally, obviously only Sitecore 8.21 at the moment, and then for the different types of server setups we're following. So the example I'm going to show you is based on XP0, and within the quick starts we just have these 2 files. And the one we're really interested in is the parameters file, and this is the one the first file we should be configuring ourselves. And really this is just specifying which Mongo instances we wish to be connected to. And then alongside that, we have our Sitecore web deploy packages. And these are basically the 3 I've just downloaded from that website. I'll show you the XP1 because it's a bit more interesting. You can see within here we have web deploy packages which represent the 4 different Sitecore server types we need to deploy. And within these, we have, it's a standard web deploy package. We have our DATPack files which represent the databases we need to deploy. There's additional scripts to create users. And then within content, we have our default Sitecore installation. So the reason why I say we may want to create our own custom ones is rather than having to deploy Sitecore and then install Coveo, it'd be much better to create Sitecore with Coveo and then be able to deploy that in a repeatable process.
Is the config already kind of, you know, how many config things you need to change for every server? Is that already done for you, or is that done by the PowerShell scripts afterwards?
I think that's done within these packages, so that's why there's specific configuration, effectively a specific package for each instance.
You could almost say to people, if you're struggling to configure your servers, you could kind of use those as a template, right? Even if you're not using
and
Azure.
technically this, I guess, would all run without using Azure. So you could deploy that package to a local server or a server somewhere else. I think this whole process could be effectively mimicked for local environments and things. Which, if you've got a local QA server not on Azure, you may still want to follow this process. So as well as that, because that's basically what Sitecore gave me, I've then created my own demo configuration. And this is basically a copy of that configuration I showed earlier, and I've just spun up some Mongo instances on MLab, and this is where I've uploaded my Sitecore package to. And then on top of that, to make life even easier for myself, I've then just encapsulated everything into a PowerShell script. And this PowerShell script is a piece of cake. So you basically need to specify the Azure resource group name, which is, I think it's probably recommended to have different resource group names for each environment type. So you want to separate your QA from your UAT, and you definitely want to keep your production separate, and obviously you can lock those down as you go up. So you might give more developers access to QA. You then have your subscription ID, Sitecore license, references to the ARM template we're looking to deploy, so this is XP0, the parameters I've specified, and then the data center we're going to deploy to. Then we import the Azure Toolkit commandlets, so then they're available to use within this script context. There's then a separate, so I should note you need Azure PowerShell tools, I think that's what it's called, installed before we can do any of this. But these are kind of default Azure modules. These aren't Sitecore specific. But effectively what we're doing in this try and catch is we're going to prompt you to log in to your Microsoft account. And that just gives a little extra layer of protection, so no one can just run this script. I could safely upload this to GitHub, and you have my subscription ID, but without logging in, you don't have a token to do anything. And then this is where we actually do the interesting Sitecore stuff, and this is just running a commandlet as part of the Azure Toolkit with all the parameters we specified earlier. And I'll just show you that really quickly. So just run this script, and what that will do is it will prompt me to log in. And there we go. So that's picked up my subscription, and now it's running through creating all the resources we need on Azure. And this takes 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, I'd say. So still, you wouldn't want to be doing this as part of your continuous integration process, because it takes too long. But at least here we've got a script that we can easily wipe a whole environment and start afresh if we need to. And obviously this can then, you can do it once for QA and then adapt it for your staging and production environments. Once you've done it, most of the hard work's done. And so just to prove it's working, it's already started then creating the various resources as part of that script. Because this is a XP0 instance, we only get a single web app because everything's contained in the same one. So yeah, that's Sitecore Azure. I think going forward, especially from an agency perspective, this is probably almost going to become our default offering. I think it's going to be a big shift away from Redweb offering to build servers and completely manage that infrastructure. It's going to be much more us advising how to use the Azure platform, what type of services you need, and then us almost being infrastructure consultants and helping manage and look after that Azure environment rather than our own Redweb cloud style. The one thing I'd probably advise is looking to move to the consumption model, so to really make use of the flexibility of web apps and scaling, you really need to be on a consumption license. So, you know, if you're limited to 2 CDs, you can by all means scale that down, but you can't scale beyond that. However, as soon as you're on the consumption model, you can go to town. It's always important to remember this is stateless, so you can't install software on servers, you can't be storing things on disk. Not that we should be anyway, but it's something we really have to bear in mind. Yeah, so any questions? Well, thank you very much. So we're going to jump straight into Tristan's talk, and then there should be some pizzas arriving, and then Steve's going to wrap things up.
Oh, damn!
What I will say is, right, I am not a developer, and everything Tom said, as much as it was probably really informative to the rest of you, was well over my head. I'm Tristan, I'm going to have some chat there. I'm the Sitecore account manager here at Redweb. I've got here one of a radar chart, which may hopefully make more sense to you by the end of this, fingers crossed. But I'm an account manager by trade, more focused around helping our customers get more out of Sitecore, more specifically the functions that aren't just a CMS. As you can see, I'm very honest, and I know Jack all about development. But anyway, so hopefully there's a 30-slide presentation, and hopefully it shouldn't take very long, and maybe screenshots, and I'll just batch them. So, first things first. Things about Sitecore, pretty obvious, it's powerful, right? It's ideal for enterprise, great for content management, and it's feature rich. And everyone knows how the marketing features work. Everyone, right? I'm sure we all do. So, for the chance to win a Snickers, right? There's a Snickers that grabs it. Approximately, how many of the 520-ish UK Sitecore customers actually use it more than just a CMS and basic personalization? So I'll take a percentage or a number of customers.
5%.
No. Anyone else?
3%.
No. You can be a bit higher than 10.
15.
No.
20.
20.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Dave. Well done.
I said 12, I'll take 20.
20 or
Somebody said 20.
Someone said 20. But that's right. 20% of businesses only really use it for more than just a CMS and basic personalization. And to be honest, basic personalization is so easy. It is really simple, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. What's difficult is the bits beyond that. So just telling the systems do it, as in I come onto the site, I meet this parameter and change this component. That's really simple. But what's behind that is profiling your users, profiling your content, understanding how to change the journey based on whether they fall into your target market or not. And that's a little bit what we're going to go through today. beyond the CMS is quite a broad subject that Tom gave me. So I'm kind of, the main question I get asked by pretty much every developer is how we do personalization. So I thought I'd tackle that subject and then you can bother me no more. So, personalization. And I guess, what is it? I mean, it's pretty simple. It's rules-based, but just rules based on the website that enables the website to change based if you hear that or not. Pretty simple. It's got two types, implicit, explicit. Explicit is something we definitely know. Let's say you trigger a goal. You sign up for a newsletter. Then from there, that explicitly we know you sign up for a newsletter. So why are we showing you the newsletter sign up? For example, really crude example, an implicit is just the stuff that we kind of infer or we imply. So you're browsing through the site, based on the pages you've viewed, we think you're a woman because you have viewed on women-related things. Some people may just like to view women's content, but you know that's I guess the risk we have to take by showing them pregnancy pics. So let's have a look at the rules editor. Something you guys are probably already familiar with. Find my browser. Here we go. I've got two of them up. I'll have to log back in again. And really strong password. Whoopsie daisy. Whoopsie.
Now I know what it is.
We're ISO certified here. Right. So we're going to the experience editor, and this is the really simple bit. And you probably wonder why we've got 30 slides on this bit. Actually, the 30 slides is on the profile. So this is the simple bit. So let's drill down. We all know Jetstream. It's a great site. As you can see, I've butchered it to hell, and it doesn't look like it used to. I can't get it back yet. So let's take this particular component. You click on the component, and then you get this little box come up. This is the little badge we want here, the personalization one. And as you can see, out of the box, Jetstream had a shed load of rules in. I'm going to override this rule. As you can see, I put this rule in already, but I'm going to show you how I put that rule in. And so you click edit, you get the rules editor. Now, there are so many rules in here that it's really simple. You just click on the rule and then you change the variable. It's really that simple. The one I like to use to really highlight whether personalization works or how the personalization works is where the visit is the duration of greater than 2 seconds, because otherwise it takes a really long time. And then that's the rule. And you can either personalize the content, as in change what the component says or change the component in general. I like to make it simple, to make it really obvious that it's happened, and I like to hide the component. I don't do that for everything, or there's a site will be empty, but just because a crude example. So just quickly, just to show you how I did it, you go in, you click a rule, and this rule is where the visit. So you can search up here for, if I can type visit, and then you can look at this one here. I'll click this one here where the duration of the visit is so a certain number of seconds. You can also add more rules. So I can click another rule and it'll add an and variable, and you can change that variable and or, for example, and you just click this bit here, and then you can change whether it's greater than, less than, equal to, and you can just change the number there. I don't want to bore you, so we're going to leave it at 2 seconds. And then let's start open a new one. So my visit should have hopefully already reached 2 seconds. So if I go to check my flight status, and if I come back, it hasn't gone yet. Let me just restart. It did work, honestly. And there's part of my demo that unfortunately I've broken, which Steve tried to help me with, but it just won't work. Which is not overly important, so don't worry about it. But basically, that rule's in place. That's been published. It was published a while ago. So as I browse the site, it should, and I say should, it normally works. Performance issues and all that. There we go. It's gone. Yay. See, I was there for more than 2 seconds, and it removed it. Now I could change that by saying actually, as the quick example I gave with the newsletter sign up. I could actually say, if I triggered this goal, and I could set a goal on the newsletter sign up page or the button, if I've done that, hide that newsletter sign up component or replace it with something else. So that's the really simple bit, and you can do that with any component on the site. You can treat it content, you can get rid of it if you want, but that's really simple. And unfortunately, that's kind of the easy bit done. And now I'm going to attempt to talk you through how we can profile content and personalize based on behavioral browsing. So the other one's really simple. This one's a little bit more. Hopefully we can demystify it. But first of all, there needs to be, from a marketing perspective, what do we need? And I'll breeze through the what do we need from the business. So I'm sure you're probably not fussed about what you need from the business, but more about how you can do it. So first of all, we need to identify your current users or target market. We can't track behaviours and patterns unless we know what we're tracking. Right? Then we need to configure some profiles. Now I'll run through what these mean in a minute, because Sitecore have really kindly named profiles, patterns, profile cards and things really nicely, which makes life really simple for us. It doesn't. We need to then configure the profile cards. We then need to profile the content. So once we've configured everything in the back end about what our content is and what our customers look like, we need to then assign that to content. Next, we need to configure predefined visitor patterns. So who are our target market and what are their behaviours like? And then we can create the personalization based on the patterns. I've already taken you through the personalization. You just click on the component. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Click on the component and select the rule, and then if they meet said behavioural pattern or meet the select criteria, magic will happen with the component, whether it disappears or changes. And then finally you analyse and optimise. I won't take you through the analysis. I'm really just trying to take you through, and I'll speak through my business analysis of Jetstream. It may be completely wrong, but that's not relevant really. So we've got Jetstream. Obviously I didn't stay on that for longer than 2 seconds because that's bringing up the funds there, ironically. But let's have a look at Jetstream stats. So first of all, before we can really profile it, we need to know who they are. So the types of user, we've got business travellers, we've got families, we've got couples, we've got party goers, and we've got sightseers. They're the sort of people who would go on Jetstream and buy a trip. Then we've got the types of trip. So we've got beach holidays, city breaks, couples retreats, party trips or sightseeing trips. Pretty normal. You know, they may have opportunities to branch out, but you never know. And then you've got stages of buying. But the stages of buying is something that actually you'll probably find in most e-commerce sites or in most sites, whether it's a charity site, that it's not stages of buying, but maybe stages of donation. But it is most common that the stages of buying will always be in here. And they'll normally be the same. So you've got, for example, find, they're searching for something, they're searching for a product, then evaluate, maybe they're comparing the two together. They decide they're in the decision phase, do I buy it, do I not, what do I buy? And then they engage, they buy. The next one is applicate, you've bought, you start sharing things. So they're Jetstream stats, I don't expect you all to remember them, but this is what we're basing a lot of our stuff on. Next is what I mentioned earlier. Sitecore have been very kind and made everything begin with a P. Doesn't really help. So I've put what in the way I perceive it, and maybe you can put your own thing to it, but I've put my view of what they mean, so it makes it easy for me to understand what the hell's going on. So if I think about it too much, I end up confusing myself. So profile is a factor, right? And I'll break into these in a little bit more detail, but it's ultimately something we are defining again. So a factor will be a stage in the buying cycle. A profile will be a stage in the buying cycle. So stage of the buying cycle, and then it can break down even further. You've got profile keys, which is the variable of the factor. Okay, so stage of the buying cycle is the profile. Profile key is find, search, evaluate, and buy. Then you've got the pattern card, which is the segment of the user. So remember I mentioned you've got the behaviours of the user, and we'll go through that in a bit. That's actually one of the last things we do. But that is basically, I am Tristan, and I like to, and I am a business traveller, and that business traveller will have a set pattern definition. I'm not a business traveller, but my name is Tristan. Profile card, that is what we use to apply to content. So you can either, now this is where I've not gone through this specific example of profile cards, because actually it can confuse matters when I'm trying to explain it. But ultimately, when you are profiling your content, you've got a piece of content, let's say for example, it's a couples retreat events, for example, that is going to have potentially families, but probably wouldn't be a couple. So it would be a couple, it would fall under the couple trip. It probably wouldn't fall under business, so it would go on the 0 on business. Maybe a sightseeing tour, because Venice is pretty sightseeing. So you start to build up a radar diagram, and I'll explain this a little bit more. So first of all, the profile. So example of this, as I mentioned before, you get the stages of the buying cycle, but it's a category defined we define the criteria. But for example, stages of the buying cycle, interest, so sort of a very good one where I talked about a sports store, for example. One of the profiles might be interest. So in this sports store, am I a gymnast? Am I a runner? Am I a weightlifter? Evidently, I'm none of them, but that they are the profiles. The most relevant for this example is stages in the buying cycle on holiday type. Holiday type is a really simple one, right? So you can do a business trip or a couples retreat or whatever. So that's the profile. Does that make sense before I go on? Okay. Next is the profile key. So I've taken those most relevant examples and I've broken it down. So stages in the buying cycle, the keys would be find, evaluate, decide, engage, and advocate. And then the trip types will be a beach holiday, city break, couples retreat, party trip, sightseeing, and a business trip. So those are the keys. So they fall under the profile. Next, you need to add some values to the keys. Now, they can be anything you like. They can be 1 to 100 for the work matters, but they need to be relative to each other. Otherwise, there's going to be no real meaning to what you've got. So, for example, as you can see here, I've got stage in the buying cycle. You can have 1 to 10, and visitor key we put 1 to 5. So, for example, let's say I'm on the book a flight page, or let's say even better, I'm checking in. That's going to be 0 on find because I've already found one and I'm checking in. I don't need to evaluate anymore, so again it's going to be 0 again. 0 and 10. Does that make sense? So you'll see a radar chart of that. And likewise, if I'm going to the Bahamas, it'll be probably 5 on beach holiday, 0 on city break, couples retreat, maybe a 3 or a 4, maybe a 5. Depends if you go to the Bahamas by yourself or taking kids, I don't know. Probably not a party trip and certainly not a sightseeing trip, so that'd be really low. But what it does, and the way we handle all this information, is that we need to do something like this. So you take this is a really crude website because it's very, very small, but you go to your home, the home page has no values attributed to it because you can't define anything by a home page. Not a stage in the buying cycle, you can't define the sort of person they are because, well, the home page does nothing. So, for example, destinations, really high on find, quite high on evaluate, pretty low on decision and pretty low on engage. Online check-in, really low on find, obviously, but you're 10 on engage. Credit card sign-up, bit of a mixture on all of them, but pretty average. Book a flight, you've already found, but so it's quite low still, but you're still not quite bought yet. You're still potentially on the evaluate, but you're very high on the decide and engage. So that is how we would profile the content, and that's based on one profile. You can do as many as you like. I try to keep it as simple as possible by doing one, but each business can have up to 5 profiles, even more as many as they need. The next stage would be the sort of person they are, which I won't go into, for time and confusion. So how does that look in Sitecore, I hear you ask? Well, first of all, we need to go to our marketing control panel. We've probably all seen this dashboard if we're in Sitecore 8, but there will also be a marketing control panel in the lower versions. Once we're in the marketing control panel, we go to something called profiles. Now, as you can see, we've got all these already preset here. These can be added or deleted. I've added a couple, but ignore them. just these ones here is the profiles of where you can find them. So to add a profile, you literally will right-click on profiles and insert profile. It is really simple, but you need to add something called a profile, and you can name whatever you like to it. So I put in buying stage. The buying stage will again define, find, whatever. That is your profile. Next, these are your profile keys. Find, evaluate, decision, engage. Again, right-click on this item here and insert profile key. Really simple. But you notice down here, I'm not on the right one. Where are we now? Jetstream, there we go. I've highlighted in the top right-hand corner, once we've got them in, and I'll show you how to do it in a second. Once we've got and defined all of those profiles and profile keys, we'll just pop them in the top right-hand corner there, and that's how we, in the page editor, that is. We go into page editor, select the page we want, and then we go to the profile and we assign the profile values to the page. And that will define as we go around, you consume content, and you consume values of said content, and you build up a pattern of your visitor. So, once you've clicked in this top right-hand corner here, you get this thing here. Now, I mentioned about profile cards earlier, and I'll come back to them in a minute. Try and ignore these things here. Difficult, they're quite big. But in this right-hand side here, this is where we can profile this content to one particular profile. So let's I've got on the home page, but regardless of where we are, we can say, right, well, this piece of content is relative to a value of find, and this is how we put it all together. So depending on what it is, you can find one, evaluate, they're all set to one at the moment, but you can put whatever value you want to them, depending on what sort of content it is. Really simple stuff, right? But what we got here is you can then change the values, and you see that at the bottom you've got your radar chart. The radar chart will change based on those values. While I'm here, I'll talk about these. You can add these values into your content, and obviously not all content is the same, so different contents will be different sorts of values, but you can set predefined cards, which are called profile cards. So instead of having to go for every piece of content, put a drop down and put the value of the content, you can start having things like this, where this is a searcher piece of content. So you just click on that profile card and it inserts it in. So you don't have to keep putting all the individual values of every page. So if it's a search, there's a searching piece of content, just drop in the searcher profile card. So next, and I'll take you through everything in a second on our lovely Jetstream. Profile the user. Now, the next is the pattern. So once we profile the content, we need to then understand who's actually using the content and consuming. So, what are the patterns? Now, these come as pattern cards. So it's a predefined set of profile keys by which you identify the profile. And they're your customers, basically. And you have a set visited per profile. So I mentioned you've got a profile and a profile key. For every profile you have, there will be a pattern card, which is one of these bad boys. It doesn't, or they don't all have my face on it. But for every single profile you have will have a pattern card, and that is your users of the site that are under that profile. So that was my pattern card that I created about myself. I've been relatively generous and given myself a high level of marketing skill. But I will fall into a set of predefined pattern. As I go around, I've set my content to a level, let's say, and I'll put it to this account management bit because it's there. I've set my content to, all right, the home page, which is a bad example, but I set that to an account management piece of content as a level of 6. I then scroll around a little bit more, and I set the About Us page to a value of a marketing value of 10, for example. But as I go around the site, I pick up different values of these profile keys, and you can have as many profiles as you like at once. But I'm trying to stick to one because it's complicated enough with one, and then 4 or 5. But I consume all these values, and as I go through, Sitecore will effectively take all my values and build a pattern, and obviously they're predefined patterns, so that is the Tristan pattern, and you feel free to use it. It's probably not worth much, but it's a pattern nevertheless. So as I go around and consume this content, I'll create a pattern. It may not look exactly like that, but Sitecore will then say, right, well, what does your pattern currently look like in a real-time view? And it'll say, oh god, yeah, it looks like that. And there may be 3 or 4 patterns, but then it'll say, right, well, yes, you match Tristan. And the reason and how it does that, I didn't write this myself, I'd like to point out, because I don't know what it means really, but the pattern matching is achieved by calculating the n-dimensional Euclidean distance. Basically, well, yeah. Either way, you don't need to know how it's done. It's just done. So you don't need to worry about it. It does it all itself. But basically, it takes the closest pattern match and it matches that pattern and it latches on and says, right, you are Tristan. Okay, right, brilliant. So now the next stage is actually what do we do with people that are Tristan? There's a few things I can imagine that a lot of people probably do with Tristans. But for this example, everyone loves Tristan. So, question, is anyone confused? Jack Sparrow is always confused. But let's have an example, and this is the bit I told you I broke. So you're going to have to bear with me. What is the unfortunate bit is that what I can't show you is as I browse through the site and I profile my content, is that I come up as a pattern. For some strange reason, I've broken it. I don't know why. It will be fixed. I'm sure Tom will fix it. So, as I mentioned before, let's get that page. We go to the marketing control panel and we set our profile. So just a quick and easy demo. These are our profiles. We've got our buying stage. If we want to add more, we right click and we can insert a profile. Really simple. Once we're in our profiles, I don't know how to get out of this now. There we go. Once we're in our profiles, we can add profile keys, which is again really simple right click insert. Right, there we go. So, as I mentioned, we've already got these set up. So, and they will vary depending on business, but as I mentioned, the buying stage one is a relatively simple one that will always stay with you. I mentioned that we have profile cards. These ones are predefined. So I'll show you what these ones look like. Oh dear.
If you click on view in the ribbon,
Oh, we're on that view, aren't we?
yeah, and then
Yeah, we're all down here. There we go. That looks much more pretty. So as you can see, a searcher is high on find, medium to low on evaluate, and relatively low on decide and engage. So these are predefined, so we can just drop them into content really simply. And I will show you how. So we go to our experience editor. And I won't choose the home page because it's probably a bad example. So let's look at cabin profiles, something I know that a lot of evaluators are going to want to know. So we click on the optimization tab up here, and we scroll all the way to the right, and you can see I've almost blue peated it like Tom did, but I'm going to take it through it again. Let's edit what we've got in here. Bob the business traveller profiles in there, which will probably ignore him because I haven't touched upon him. We can go in here, take our custom, and we've already got these predefined ones in. As simple as this piece of content is perfect for an evaluator, so we just drop that evaluator profile card in. Really simple. If it doesn't fit the bill, because not everything will, then you can go on customize and you can set your own values. Really simple. And as people browse, they will again pick up those values if they click on the cabin profile page, which is a notoriously popular page. So I'll pop in the the evaluator one, and I'll press OK. And then I'll press OK on that. And it's basically, you continue to go through the site and go through your content. And a lot of this is already predefined by the marketing team. You don't just do it on a whim. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But you need to define your content. Who would be viewing your content? What profile does it fall under? It may fall under multiple profiles. As you can see, Bob the business traveller was in there because he loves to know about cabin profiles because he's a businessman. So we assign all these profile cards or profile values to content. So basically, as a user goes around the site, they will pick up said content. One thing I want to show you is the pattern card for the buying cycle, because once we've assigned that content, we need to put it to a person. And you've got 4 different types of people here. You've got Debbie the decider, you've got Eddie the engaged, Evelyn the evaluator, and Freddie the finder. Now that's an army I wouldn't want to go against. But they all have profile pattern cards that look like that. They don't all look like that, but they will create a radio diagram, a radio graph that looks like that. So before we do all of this, there's a process that happens with the marketing team to define who your users are. Okay, well, who are deciders? Okay, well, what defines a decider? And they're very high in decision making, relatively low on evaluation, relatively low on fine because they've already done that, and they're relatively low on engaged because they're still deciding. Good old Debbie, never make her mind up. So as we go through the site, we can tune that content, and then we have to be put to a pattern, because that pattern will then decide, once you are been assigned to a Debbie, Eddie, Evan or Freddie, God, it's a family, then we can then change the content that you see. And this is the bit that I broke, unfortunately. As I scroll through the site, unfortunately, for some strange reason, it doesn't assign me to a pattern. So I can't physically show you it happened. But what I will show you is what we do once that's done. So to find out if you have met a pattern, and this is what you've got your experience profile here, and you can go through all of these and you can see, unfortunately I didn't meet a pattern, but I did do one before, which looks like this. If I can find me, and they're all anonymous. I have to keep my myself close to the ground. Where are you? No, I haven't matched a pattern. Well, I won't bore you with it. Basically, I matched a pattern to Bob the business traveller, and once I've met that pattern, I can then start personalising some content. That's the wrong one. Start personalising some content. So similar to the first thing I showed you, where you just purely set a rule on a piece of content, you can do that exactly the same with behavioural profiles. So our beloved Jetstream credit card sign-up that's unfortunately victim to being hidden is going to be a victim to be personalised again. So let's remove this rule. And let's add another one where I'm going to find out, let's have a look at what is it. And this is the one I want here. See that? So where the current visit matches a specific pattern card in a specific profile. So we were talking about profiles, let's say stage of the buying cycle. That's the profile. So let's click this. So first of all, we need to specify the profile. So the profile would be stage in the buying stage. So we'll call it buying stage, great. And then from there, we need to define a specific pattern. And if I have met the Freddie the Finder pattern, then what do? Now, there's a particular set of rules now. At the moment, like for example, a lot of customers or a lot of clients will have multiple profiles that make up their target market. So, for example, the finder one's probably a bad example, but let's say I'm of a specific age range, of a specific gender, of a specific person. Let's say I'm Bob the business traveller. It doesn't, it doesn't need to be male, but it's a literacy, so it could be Barbara the business traveller. But we can specify gender, specify age. We can even specify device, where you can just add new rules in. So you can start looking at device, and you can start adding different rules. So, for example, and this one works, I don't know, device detection on here, unfortunately, where the device is specific value, and you can change this, and where, and the value, I don't know what this is going to bring up, which is a bit fair. Here we go, camera, smartphone. Let's go to smartphone. So you're a Freddy the Finder, and you've come on a smartphone, and we can probably add one more to a different one. I want to visit, and it's broken. There we go. And let's add another one of those, and we're doing and, so they all need to be met for that rule to happen. So we go to specific profile, and we're going to go into the visit profile. Remember I mentioned about Bob the business traveller, and he's coming back on his business trip. He's going to again, here we go, Bob the business traveller. So this rule here identifies my target market, right, the people I want to focus on. I've got a business traveller, right? I've got someone that's on a smartphone, and I've got someone that's in the finding stage. That, to me, is an off-target market, but it's a target market. So I can set a rule to that complete target market and just press OK.
It's like where they've looked at Amsterdam and then say that target a bit of subcon content.
You can target as much as you want, and you can even do a keyword search, an internal keyword search. So I'm Freddy the Finder, I've got a smartphone, I also need the Bob the business traveller profile, and I'll search for Amsterdam in the internal keyword search, because you can't do that. You probably have very few people, depending on if you've managed to do it, but let's say the internal keyword search is a specific compares to Amsterdam. And then we've got our set rule there, is not case sensitively to. And we've got our rule there for our target market for subcon in Amsterdam. So yeah, that's how we set the rule up. And once we've done that, we can then personalise the content. So what do we want that content to be? All of these are predefined and pre-built. So what do we want to change it to? I like my classic of hiding it, but we can just change what it is. So we can say we put on a frequent flyer promotion, and we just press OK. And unfortunately, as I said, as I broke it, and I'm actually not on a smartphone, and I haven't typed in Amsterdam, I'm not actually going to read any of those conditions. But that is how you add it in. And the actual personalisation itself is really simple. If I'm honest, it's one of the simplest things to do. But it's actually the back-end work that's required to profile your users, understand how they behave, understand how many profiles you need, and what content is set profile, which is something that probably you guys don't have to do. And I'd probably be surprised if you were configuring all the personalisation as well. But that's a lot of the hard work. But once all that's done, it's really simple. You just add a rule and then change the variable. And I could have done that in a minute, but Tom asked me to talk for 40 minutes. So that is, albeit relatively confusing, hopefully it wasn't too confusing, way of personalising both behaviourally and by just normal rules without behaviour patterns. Any questions? Hello, Wayne.
Well, I think it's one question over two questions. That looks very good. On my Sitecore site, I've got 20,000 content nodes plus sub-buckets, hundreds of thousands of items there. I've got a profile of a simple one, I'm selecting what those profile cards are, etc., etc. Or is there a way where actually it will learn by what people do and do it for me?
Short answer is, Wayne. I would say you probably have to insert, you have to profile every piece of content, but what I will say is that I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that you can have child pages of that content page. Is that right? That template? Pretty sure I read it somewhere.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Exactly. There we go. But
You set out standard values.
But ultimately, you've got most pieces of content are individual and can be specific to certain people or certain values. So it's a big job, but it pays dividends at the end of it.
The learning part's interesting because obviously what you're doing there is saying, I think that people who go to this page, and this page are of the business traveller.
Yeah.
But actually, people's usage of the site could show that it could be completely different pages that match that profile. So how do you validate what you set up is correct?
You have to optimize, you have to analyze and optimize, which is step 7, which I haven't got around to doing. Which is you look at, right, well, first of all, before you even do this, you'll know your users anyway, right? You don't just hazard a guess. There is a hell of a lot of work that needs to happen before this to say, well, we know our users. Our users are this, that, and that, and they do that. That's a really bad example, but ultimately, we know our users, right? And we know how they interact with us. We know what channels they come in through, for example, and we know that they're more likely to engage with us if we show them this piece of content. But it's just a learning process. You'll never get every single thing perfect. It's just the whole, well, is this working for? We show Bob the Business Traveller, from Bob the Business Traveller, we're going to surface this piece of call to action. If we're seeing a really rubbish conversion around that call to action, then we've got to look at actually, well, where are we going wrong? And then you start doing A/B or multivariate testing and say, well, actually, what could we change? Is it the wording? Is it the colour? Do Bob's actually like pink, not blue? All those sorts of things. Or maybe it's actually, this isn't Bob at all. But that takes time. But from the beginning, you will have an understanding of who your customers are anyway. And that's not for developers to understand. And to a degree, that's maybe not for me to understand, but the business themselves to understand exactly who their customers are. So we can take all their defining factors and put them into profiles and profile kits.
So, I don't know if we have an answer if Sitecore would have that idea. For a relatively medium to large website of 10 to 20,000 items, how long does it take of setting it up, watching it, optimizing it, optimize it, until you get into that sort of optimum configuration for this? Are we talking 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years?
Well, there's a brilliant case study from when I went to the symposium of Danone Nutrition. It went on the acceleration program. Danone Nutrition sell baby food, but they're also almost article or a content site where you can learn about different stages of pregnancy, etc. Similar to the likes of organics, for example. They went on the SPOS program 2 years ago.
I don't know, Sitecore 10 and Sitecore 15, there might then become some sort of machine learning or taking it to that next level. So actually, the platform itself becomes a bit more intelligent about how things are personalised.
Yeah, that's a massive investment right now. That's probably going to be the next big thing. Probably coming, talking about that in symposium. I'm not sure it'll be for the next version of Sitecore, but indeed
It feels like a few years.
they're making big promises about machine learning right now. Suggesting content, for example, you could don't write that, you should write this instead. Dealing with massive amounts of content, as you say, suggesting almost what the tag should be, trying to take some of the maintenance away. So hopefully we can help in that respect. Tom had a good point that you can kind of profile content in a bit of an automated way. My use case is when I worked on a travel website which was split into countries, and I didn't want to go to every single holiday, which was to Argentina, and go and manually tag it with Argentina. But sometimes it's worth just asking your devs to help out with the maintainability, so you don't have your content authors constantly working for no reason. And last thing is that the search facilities and the buckets, which you mentioned, you can actually apply bulk operations to every single item in your search result, one of which is profiling. So if you want to just do a search which comes with 10,000 items in the results, you can say, okay, profile all of these with Bob the Traveller. It was
Popular now.
very quick, yeah. but yeah, room for improvement, and it's not gone unnoticed. We're working on it very hard.
Any more questions? Did that sort of answer your question, Mike? Any more questions?
What are your thoughts on profiling within a single visit session versus profiling over multiple visits, which isn't enabled by default, but you can enable it?
So, I guess really there's a point. So, yes, you can come from multiple visits, but actually, are those multiple visits pushing them through one particular profile? So, let's take the stage of the buying cycle. Is it how do you manage that against, for example, they've come back 3 times and each and every time they've moved along a stage? It's quite difficult to profile in terms of like, well, this visit there, this visit that, this visit that. We were talking earlier today, and something that we're trying to work on at the moment is once you've got all your profiles set together, can we create a custom filter in Sitecore Analytics to then basically say, right, well, I want to know where every single of the business traveller comes from, what device do they use, what referral sites are they? It's one tab.
This is what time.
And I'd say Bob's a busy man. Yeah. So, but I mean, we're looking, and once we got that there, and I think it is very possible. I think we should define it from the beginning. We can really profile against multiple visits. Say, right, well, Bob's a business traveller. They come. They've had this many visits. They trigger this many trigger this many goals. They come from this site mainly, so we know where exactly where they're coming from. I think there's a lot of power in understanding where they come from that individual visit, because they'll always change. That person will always change. And it might not even be there on the computer in that particular time.
Exactly. We always refer to that as the context of the situation. The example we like to use is, like, for example, if I buy my daughter a Peppa Pig at Christmas, and when I revisit the site again in February for Valentine's Day, I might be probably looking for something else for my wife or something like that. So it needs to be able to adapt to that and not just constantly offer me more Peppa Pigs, right? But you can choose, like, the later versions of Sitecore. You can, as you said, very quickly. The reason it wasn't enabled by default in the past was because of performance problems, but now we keep a kind of cache of your behavior in the past. So if you want to use that for some profiles, but ignore it for others, that's absolutely fine. You just need to know, kind of adapt it to your own industry. So it's got to be relevant and contextual.
Cool. Anyone else? All right, well, I will leave you there. Let's go to the pizza, I guess.
Yeah.